Evening, everyone. Great to see everybody here for another class. Please be seated. Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Teacher Certification Training course. I will be your teacher for this evening. We will be continuing in the self-control unit, Unit 3 of the intermediate series. And I hope that everybody's had the opportunity to follow along. If you are joining us, that you've been able to go back and look at previous classes to kind of help you get caught up. And if you're watching this for the first time, please don't feel like it's a lost cause that you've come in too late, because all the classes are available online. Excuse me, on the official Peaceful Solution page, but also, as was brought out previous class, William brought out about the classes now being available on the peacefulsolution.org site. So if you don't have a Facebook or whatever the case might be with that, you can still watch these classes stream live and go back and watch the previous classes on Facebook. We are in the third unit, and this is the unit that kind of ties together the first two and the last two. First two is the character and acceptance, and the last two of the intermediate series, at least not of all the material, is respect and responsibility. And we see here as we go through the information contained in the self-control unit here how, of course, in order to develop and maintain any positive character trait, or even just to develop a new positive character trait, right? Self-control is extremely vital, right? Without it, as we're talking about in this chapter, we're in chapter 5 here on maintaining your self-control, without it, you might grasp hold of a positive character trait that you've been taught in a particular class. Maybe you heard it at a workshop, or you saw it online and you thought, wow, that's great information. I'm going to start implementing that. The next day that I see someone who says or does something that might irritate me, I'm going to choose to not allow my emotions, get out of control, not allow myself to respond in a negative way. Well, that's great, but it has to be consistent, right? And in order to be consistent in developing or maintaining character traits, the character traits that we've been covering here for the last many classes, self-control is required. Okay, and that's why it's important that we go through this. And this is a book that many people like. They like to jump right to it, because there's so much vital information there. But you need the build-up, the building blocks of the previous classes and the character and the acceptance in order for this information here to really hit home and to really take root within the mind of both the teacher and the student. Okay, and that's why we continuously encourage teachers, as we are training here, to take the lessons in the order that they're given. Right? Don't jump around. That's why you might hear us as teachers mention something that's coming, right? Coming to a Peaceful Solution certification class near you, right? Out of respect, or the responsibility, or building moral excellence, or parenting, or workplace manual, moral excellence in the workplace. But we don't go into deep detail about that, right? Because it's important that we lay the foundation. And as you'll see, we're building up to a point here where these young men and women who we're training, we're starting at a kind of that preteen, teenage years, well, mostly teenage years, unless they're, kind of moved up really quick and they get into high school in 11 or 12 years of age, all the way up into adulthood, right? But the foundation has to be laid because this is the phases of life that we're dealing with people in. And even in dealing with adults, somebody who's never been taught any of these lessons from the very beginning, it's still essential to lay the foundation for them so that they'll understand that they have to have self-control, but why they need to have self-control and what they need to have self-control in, right? Because if you tell a person, hey, when you get angry, you need to practice self-control, and then 2 weeks later they say, yeah, I got in a fight. Well, I thought you were supposed to be practicing self-control. Well, yeah, I hit that person strategically in the face over and over. I exercised control in doing it. I wasn't just wilding out, right? Remember, all the information that we taught about, positive character, positive choices, what's right, what's wrong, what's positive, what's negative. All these things play a part in understanding and developing and maintaining this character trait that we're talking about in self-control. And we've actually heard that, several of the teachers have heard that coming from, a person or two in regards to them practicing self-control, when they were involved in some type of where they lost self-control and they allowed themselves to strike someone else. And their response to, what about self-control? Why aren't you practicing self-control? Oh, yes, I was in full control of my actions when I did that. That was their response. You see, so getting the facts and making sure they're right and understanding how to apply these things in every situation is very, very important. It's why we have to have teachers to guide us in things, right? We have to have teachers to guide us. As you're learning these things, you have teachers to guide you. And as you go out and teach your students or start training other teachers, they'll have someone who they can go back to and give them explanations and help them to understand the points of the matter of why these character traits, these characteristics, these lessons are extremely important in society today. They've been always important, but, we didn't live 500 years ago. We can't go back and change, the past. We can't go back and change yesterday, right? We can only focus on and change the present and set our mind in advance, as we learned in the character unit, on how we're going to respond in the future. Now, granted, you can't predict what might occur in the future, but you can set your mind in advance that if something does occur, I'm going to take these traits, these skills that I've learned in the peaceful solution, and I'm going to put them into practice, right? A brake, using your brake in your car does you no benefit when the car is sitting in the driveway off and in park, right? The brake becomes extremely beneficial to you when you need to stop. Okay, so there's a time and a place when these things have to be put into practice. But first you need to learn how to use them, what they are, what they're for, and when to apply them. So we are in, like I said here, chapter 5. And as I mentioned previously, the title of this chapter is Maintaining Your Self-Control. And you'll see this theme continuing throughout all the units here. You talked about maintaining a positive character and so forth, because like I said at the beginning here, it's not enough just to learn it and do it once. As the example was given, following the rules of the road in stopping at a stop sign. You did that, you obeyed that law. Now, every stop sign you go through, you have a free pass to continue driving through them because you've already done it once, Well, no, it doesn't work that way. And this is the way it is with character education, because practicing self-control and how you respond to a difficult situation or a difficult person once is not enough, right? Our resolve, remember what we learned in character and acceptance, our resolve is going to be tested, right? Our resolve to uphold the moral principles that we've been taught is going to be tested. Now, a person might not realize that they are your test for that day. They might realize and are trying very hard to be your test for that day. But it doesn't matter what the other person does. It really doesn't, in regards to how you respond, right? We can't ever let our guard down. We always have to have it in our minds. Remember, not that we should go around expecting that everybody's disrespectful and I live in a world of disrespect, so I need to walk around with, like a chip on my shoulder, being ready to strike out at someone with a positive response, But we should expect that occasionally something might go wrong. Someone might step on our toe. There might be a trigger. Someone might say or do something that just gets a little bit underneath our skin, right? And we've had that for years. Now we're trying to work out these little kinks and wrinkles of our character to straighten ourselves out. And it takes time, it takes effort. And think about us, we're adults. We've been around a lot longer if we're teaching young men and women of the ages of, 13 through 18, 14 through 18 and so forth. We've had a lot more life experience, and we should be able to understand the struggle and the effort that it takes to get rid of a bad character trait, to get rid of a bad habit, to get rid of a negative way of thinking. So having that in mind as a teacher should give us a little bit of empathy in working with our students and understanding that, yes, they have a struggle too, and it's going to be a challenge for them, but it's not impossible, right? With much effort and diligence and self-control, they can overcome and accomplish any positive goal. All right, so let's just, let's see here. I think we were on LP4. That's lesson plan 5, page D. And William read this last class, and of course we are still in the middle of this lesson plan, this procedure, I guess I should say, because we're on page 123, and this covers, we see here, 122 through 125. And it says here, if you go back here, we'll just read that real quick just to refresh in our minds on where we are in this lesson. Lesson plan 5, page D, procedure 4. Explain to students that although there are many types of influences, and of course the previous teachers covered several of the many types of influences, right? How many of you were able to see the blue sky today? The blue sky. Anybody? Nobody saw the blue sky? Okay. I know if everybody's walking around with their eyes closed. I don't know if this, did you feel the breeze coming through today? The wind? In Texas, sometimes the wind is, it's pretty fierce, right? Anybody smell any fresh cut grass? No? No somebody smelling fresh cut grass? All right. Anybody smell any cow manure? Right? That's around, right? You live next to farms, you smell that type of thing, right? Anybody hear any peaceful music today? Nobody heard any peaceful? Anybody hear any hard rock music today? Right? What about food? Anybody smell any delicious food today? Yeah. Did you see any colors today? Did you talk to any friends or any family members? I think most of us have encountered most of, if not all, these things today, right? And those things all fall under the category of influences, and sometimes we take things for granted. In Texas, I'm originally from Ohio, and Ohio has, I can't remember if it's 60% or more. I don't know what the numbers are now, but overcast days, right? There's a lot of cloudy days in Ohio. In fact, before I moved to Texas, I knew there was other things up there, but the only thing I ever really saw occasionally was the moon. I never saw stars twinkling in the sky because there was so much light pollution and things of that nature. It was just hard to see stars growing up in their city. And seeing those things out here in Texas, and even where we are, it's not as dark as it can be. When you get farther out into West Texas, away from cities, you can see a lot more distinction in the Milky Way galaxy itself. But even seeing something like that in the vastness and the beauty of the Milky Way, and seeing that cloud, that what they call Magellan, I think they call it Magellan cloud, across the sky there, it kind of puts a certain mindset in how kind of small we really are in the vastness of everything that's out in space, right? And that's space. I mean, think about here on Earth, there's a lot that takes place here, but all these things are influences, and they have the ability to affect the way we think, the way we feel, the way we act, right? And getting a nice 20-mile-an-hour cool breeze, on a 100-degree day can actually make you feel a little bit better, especially when you sweat so much that you don't have any more sweat to give. And now you're pretty much going into like heat stroke at that point. Make sure you get yourself hydrated. Keep yourself hydrated in this warm weather, because we in Texas, we're not the only ones that are going through these things. There's many places that are experiencing extreme heat, extreme flooding, and many other difficulties in the environment. But it says here, there are many types of influences. Now, this lesson will focus on 5. Okay, we're just mainly focused on 5 in this lesson, lesson number 5. TV, movies, video games, music, and peers. TVs, movies, video games, music, and peers. These are generally the things that affect people in this age group. Okay, not that there's nothing else, but these are the kind of the more predominant things. Remember what we covered in acceptance, these early teenage years is a time period when young men and women are trying to seek acceptance outside of their immediate family. And this is why peers can be such a powerful influence in a young man or woman's life. Next sentence says, instruct students to turn to pages 122 to 125 and read the sections now showing the violence continues, not as harmless as you might think, and that's what we're going to be reading here on page 123, and monkey see, monkey do, and complete the exercise on page 125. Emphasize that although these are sources of entertainment in most cases, in most cases they are negative influences that desensitize young adults to sexually explicit, violent, and aggressive acts. Now, most of us can pretty much remember when we were younger, the things that we see on mainstream television today were pretty much things that were, for the most part, only available in movies, movie theaters, or if you rented a movie that was like rated R, right? Nowadays, these are things that are just on everyday primetime television, right? For any young person who is very impressionable, easily influenced, to see and those things be absorbed into their minds, right? And of course, these start to shape their values, right? And anything that affects your values affects your character. Because if you don't couple values with morality, then the things you value and how you go about obtaining those things, or maintaining those values, or upholding those values, can bring some trouble in your life, right? Because like we talk about the people who value money, right? And they steal it. They go about stealing it instead of working for it or getting a job or starting a business. There's many ways to obtain money or to obtain anything outside of something that's illegal, something that takes away, something that does harm to someone else. So we're going to look at these things. Now, in the previous classes, Chris and William were going over kind of the foundation of, again, we covered it in character, we covered it in acceptance, we're covering it again here in self-control of influences and what influences are, how they affect the mind. William showed some interesting information in regards to the subliminal messages and the messaging that is pumped into the minds of everyday citizens, unbeknownst to them. These things that are kind of under our conscious mind's radar. Remember what we talked about, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, right? Even though the subconscious mind, we're not aware of it, it plays a very important part in our decision-making process, right? Because our subconscious mind also is an influence to us. The thoughts, the feelings, the experiences, those things bump back to our conscious mind and they help to influence our decisions. And this is where kind of the challenge comes in. Because remember what we learned in the character unit, chapter 1 on page 4, in regards to character and how it's formed and where it comes from and so forth. Experiences, environments, influence, these things that a young person learns in their very early developmental years in the family, those things kind of get formed and locked into the subconscious mind. And if they continue down that path, then it just makes it stronger. Well, as you come to the Peaceful Solution classes and realize that there are certain aspects of your character trait traits that are not positive and you want to get rid of these things, well, you've got to contend with all the baggage, the years of baggage, the information, the influences, the experiences, the choices that you've made, the things that you've witnessed and possibly witnessed and were told that this is right, this is acceptable, this is an okay way to deal with things. I saw a thing that had come across. It was a clip, and I don't know what the movie was from. I never saw the movie, but a young man, I don't know, he was 12 or 13 or something like that. He was being picked on and he was being bullied, and he came home after getting picked on, and the boy that was bullying him had his father there with him, kind of egging him on. Well, when that young man came home, his father was he was a little bit of a hard nose, he's like, who did this to you? What occurred? What took place? Who bullied you? Who did this? Who beat you up? And the father's response was to go in the street and find the boy, put him into submission, and then have his son do the same thing to that boy that boy did to his son. Now, what do you think is put in the mind of that young man? That violence can solve problems. After all, my dad showed me, right? He told me so. He pointed it out to me. That boy never messed with me again. Right? Now, these are things that take place on an everyday basis, right? Because parents themselves have not been taught, because they had these same influences growing up themselves, they have not been taught that two wrongs don't make a right. So when they get older, being the product of the negative influences coming forth from their parents who were never taught as well, they train their children in the same way. So over a period of time, you have a society of people, scattered here and there, who feel that retaliation, violence, verbal, physical, emotional, sexual abuse, it's an acceptable way to deal with problems, right? It might not bring peace, but at the very least, I feel great afterwards. I've been vindicated. But that never solves a problem. It's like a person who uses alcohol to escape their problems and they get drunk, right? When they get sobered up and the hangover's gone and the headaches go away, they still have to deal with the problem, right? They've just lost other things in the process or lost time in regards to what they can do to try to find a solution. So this foundation here was laid from the previous teachers on what are influences, showing the difference between positive and negative influences on page 120, 119 and 120. And also we went over about the STOP acronym and helping us to remember to consistently practice self-control. Stop, think, options, and proceed. Recognize that the influences are negative in this regard on page 121, because this STOP acronym, right? You can take this concept here and apply it to virtually any decision-making process that you're involved in, any environment that you're in, any conflict that you have to respond to, okay? And as we see here in regards to influences, well, look, stop, recognize that the influence is negative, because this is what we're talking about in order to practice self-control and recognize if you're being influenced in a positive or a negative way, right? Recognize that the influence is negative. If it's positive, well, you don't have to worry about it, right? It's not going to be something that, as has been reiterated and will continue to be reiterated, if it's not something that brings harm to you, someone else, or the environment, okay, it's not negative. It's not, at least not a negative influence. Now, it doesn't mean you have to do it, right? But you should easily be able to recognize that it's not negative, okay? Think. This will affect the choices I make and could lead me to compromise what I know to be right. If it's a negative influence, yes, it will affect the choices you make. Options, make the choice or make a choice to avoid negative influences. And that comes down to the individual. Now, this is not to say that a person might not have the desire to do the opposite thing, might not have the desire to run with their friends or to trespass on a property or whatever the case might be. But they have the choice to do it, right? We're always faced with a choice. And yeah, the desire might be there until we completely overcome that and put more positivity, place more value on the benefits that come from upholding these positive character traits. Until that supersedes all those negative influences in our life or those negative, harmful, risk-taking behavior desires that are in our heart and our mind, that's going to be there. But eventually, those things are going to start to, get lower and lower and lower on the scale. But you always have a choice. Make a choice to avoid negative influences. And then the last one under proceed there is make a decision to avoid anything that can influence in a negative way. And that's some of the things that we're talking about here as we proceed forward. And some of the things that were covered in the previous classes were what was shown here in regards to movies. Now, not always are we able to avoid people at all times, because if you have a class with a person who might be, possibly a negative influence, or a coworker who might like to be a person who lives life on the wild side, lives life on the edge. Rules are made to be broken. Born to be wild bumper sticker on their Yugo. You can't avoid them necessarily, but you can choose not to go out of your way to associate with them outside of what's necessary for work or what's necessary for school. Okay? You don't have to be disrespectful to that person because they have not been trained, because they have not been educated, in what's necessary to develop a positive character. But you, through your positive example, can show them that no, you don't condone such negative characteristics, such negative traits, such risk-taking behavior, right? And that you're not going to participate in it. So we see here movies, that gave some of the statistics there. Like William was saying, Nielsen's not used very much nowadays because not everyone's sitting down watching television. A lot of people are, on the internet, on their tablets, on their phones. There's so many other various forms of social media, even where there are shows and movie clips and everything, that most people don't have to sit down in front of a television to allow things to absorb into their minds and influence them. But we saw how, there are so many acts of violence that are in those films, those movies, those television shows. Now even shorts. They've got shorts, or what do they call, I guess they're just called short films, short movies, right? 8, 10, 15, 20 minutes long. And those things are made for people with shorter attention spans. I guess, no, maybe they're not. But they also have the same type of content in there. Now, there are some people out there who are trying to bring awareness to certain problems within our society, okay? And they're trying to bring awareness to things like teen suicide, or bullying, or pollution, the dangers of pollution, or animal abuse, or how we're hurting our environment, or things like that. And there are people who are generally concerned and trying to make people aware, and they use media as a platform to do so. But we still have to be very mindful of the influences that go into our mind, even in seeing some of those things. And then you look at the very bottom of page 122, it says, many studies prove that witnessing repeated acts of violence could influence you to choose violence as a means of solving conflicts, right? Now, it's kind of a misnomer there, because you don't really solve conflicts by using violence. In your own mind, you've dealt with conflict. I shouldn't even say you've dealt with it. You've responded to that conflict through violence. You haven't solved anything, because when you really look at it from the standpoint of the peaceful solution, when you put these concepts, these principles into practice, both parties benefit. Both parties, right? The speaker, the listener, the person who is being the aggressor, the person who is receiving the aggression, right? When the peaceful solution is practiced, both parties actually benefit, right? No one walks away being taken advantage of, being hurt. Now, I mean, somebody's pride could be hurt, I guess, if they were made to realize that the choice that they were making was not a positive one, and they might be a little embarrassed about it, right? But there's not going to be any harm that comes to that person when the peaceful solution is practiced. How does this show self-control? That is, responding with violence. This doesn't. The answer is it doesn't. And then over to page 123, we got started here with some of the visual effects of the video games, right? The video games that a lot of people play, a lot of young people play, a lot of older people play as well. I think I mentioned to you a time when I was at a person's house doing a job, and this guy is, I don't know, maybe mid-20s, early 30s, could have been in his mid-30s, and I thought he was having an argument with somebody, possibly on the phone, because I didn't think anybody else was there. I thought he was, yelling and screaming at somebody like, come on, what's your problem, blah, 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 turns out when the door was open in his room, when I had to tell him that I was Lee, he had 3 screens, and he had his computer system and his joysticks and his headphones set there. He was playing some military first-person shooter game, right? And he was trying to get his comrades to come on and let's go in here and, blast these people and everything. And they were moving a little bit too slow, but, he was excited to get in there and start killing those enemies, right? Who were somebody else maybe on the other side of town or in another state or something like that, country possibly even, okay? But these things are influences, right? People don't realize how powerful these influences are. In fact, the military doesn't hide that they use video games to train many of their soldiers. Okay, so that shows how powerful those influences are. Now, I'm sure they're not using, ABC, put the color in the matching color, the square in the right hole, video games to train their soldiers. These are things that are training them for tactical warfare and things of that nature. How to find and destroy the enemy with the least amount of casualties to our own people as possible. All those other guys, right? But the least amount of casualties to our own people, okay? We just have to think about some of these things. We're not saying that these men and women are bad people or by any means. Everyone's doing what they're trained to do. They're doing what they best feel is right. But we have to always go back to the point that's brought. Does it bring harm? Right? Does it bring harm not only to myself, but to others? Does it bring harm to the environment? And one of the key things we have to keep in mind in regards to even that question is everyone has value. Everyone. Even the guy that's being the aggressor. He has value, or she has value, right? They just haven't been taught. And they have not seen that value within themselves. Otherwise, they would be making better choices. Okay, so this is what, this mindset, this way of thinking places us as teachers of the peaceful solution, both students and teachers of the peaceful solution, in a better position to make a better decision, okay, because we have the facts and we know how to proceed with caution. So let's look at the middle part of that page there, on page 123, and let's look at the box here before we get into the title here. It says, many people say that entertainment today is just harmless fun. Surely looking at violent movies and playing violent video games will not affect my character. I can still control myself. Well, the question is, can you? Let's look at this here next section. Not as harmless as you might think. Well, according to numerous studies, witnessing acts of violence harms the minds of children and young adults like you. Now, remember who we're talking to, ages, 14 through 18 years old, right? Their minds are still pretty plastic, right? Still formidable and so forth. Influenceable, able to be influenced, impressionable and so forth. This word witnessing is, it just simply means see take place, right? To see take place. uh, have knowledge of, right? To have knowledge of from a personal, um, uh-oh. Oh, from I'm sorry, for a personal experience or situation, okay? From personal experience or situation. All right, so to see take place, something that you see take place or have knowledge of from personal experience, or to actually be involved in that situation yourself, okay? So witnessing acts of violence, whether they watch it on television, and in this case, this is what we're talking about, um, you know, television, video games, movies, but let's not discount the fact that a lot of these things are played out in the child's own life, at home, right? Amongst their siblings, possibly amongst their parents, maybe from on the receiving end from a parent or a caretaker. I watched a couple of documentaries about people who have. It's this guy. He kind of does documentaries on people who've, they've made some bad decisions in life, and some people have tried to improve their lives. Some people are kind of still in that way of life, and some people just really don't know what to do. Okay, and he kind of asked the same series of questions with pretty much everybody that he interviews, and a common, although it's not always the case, across the board, because sometimes it's not that way, but a common theme that you see in a lot of people who are engaged in very, very risk-taking behaviors, from promiscuity and drug abuse and violence and gang activity and things of that nature, is they were abused in many cases at home, right? They were abused themselves, or they personally witnessed this abuse taking place to a family member in their home. In a lot of cases, it was by people who they should have been trusting as their guides and protectors, people who should have been taking care of them, people who were responsible or had authority over them, right? They used that power and authority to abuse that individual. And this was across the board for both men and women. Now, remember, we covered this in chapter 2 of the character unit. So as teachers, we kind of, we kind of already have this background. When we see certain types of behaviors coming forth from people, it gives us a little insight into what's going on, at least in their minds. And even though we don't have all the details, we can probably guess that there were certain activities that took place in the home to some degree that was witnessed, that influenced some of their behaviors, or that at least contributed to maybe some of their frustrations or their anger or their acting out, displacing of their anger and so forth. But witnessing these things harms the minds of young children and adults like you. Yet, children routinely watch acts of verbal and physical aggression, murder, rape, and theft on television regularly. Even there's one particular channel that used to, I haven't seen it in years, but it used to be on cable, and it was supposedly their theme was television for women, right? And I kind of considered it as like the Harlequin, station for women. I don't know if you remember those little Harlequin books, those love novels and things like that. People always wanted to sell them at garage sales for 25 cents a piece, and people would flock to them. They'd buy them because it took them out of reality. They lived in fantasy. And this is a lot of times what you get with television and movies and so forth. It's a fantasy, right? People kind of live vicariously through these movies. If I was him, or if I was Superman or Batman, or, this character in the movie, or this detective or whatever, or this person, or sometimes people like to be the bad guy, right? Oh, that's why he got caught. He should have did this, or he should have did that, and he would have never got caught. You got both sides of the coin there. But even on those that channel that I was referring to, which was supposed to be more kind of family oriented, they've got the same acts of violence, and illicit sex and things like that that take place on there as well. Things that destroy families, that cause divorces, all those things that take place in everyday society life. They're kind of glamorize it and doing it to generate an income, right? That's one of the things, and we probably won't get into it in this class, and we might, we'll see, but we have time to cover it a little bit later. This is a pretty big chapter that we're in right now. But they watch these things. Children watch these things, physical aggression, murder, rape, theft, and that's real big right now, with this physical aggression. There's a lot of young movies that are targeted to young people that deal with bullying. But in the movie or the show, kind of the thing is the young person who is being bullied gets some type of advantage or some upper hand. And now they're able to go and defend themselves against the bullies, right? They get some type of superpower, or they get some type of help from some big bad, other person, or they hit their head or something like that, and now something's unlocked in their mind, or they take karate lessons, or whatever the case might be. It's never showing how to solve things in a peaceful way. It's always some type. Now they know it's laced with comedy and things that are funny to kind of make you laugh at it and enjoy it. That's enjoyable. Well, at least they didn't take advantage of him anymore. But that was real funny how he did that. He spilled that cake on that guy's face, right? But as that's taking place, that's an influence that's going into your mind, going into the young person's mind, going into whoever's mind that's watching that. That's laced with laughter. Laughter, when you laugh at something, you kind of, it's funny, and it kind of brings about an acceptance into your mind, right? I've never heard of a person getting their leg broken and they're just bust up in hilarious laughter, or getting their finger slashed in the door, slammed in the door, and that's their response to it, right? It's usually some type of tears or screaming out in pain. Well, laughter brings that in, and TV producers, television shows have used it for years to literally promote immoral behavior, very immoral behavior. And over years, society has become what used to be considered, quote unquote, a taboo, to see something like this on television, or to hear this type of language on television. It's now become accepted. It's now become the norm. Rated R is now PG-13, right? The standard has been lowered and lowered. It hasn't been raised in society. It's been lowered and lowered and lowered. And it will continue to go in that direction if allowed. Well, witnessing repeated acts of violence leads to what is known as desensitization. Now, I believe William covered this last class in regards to desensitization, or to desensitize, on page 231 of your glossary. It means to lose the ability to be caring and concerned for the safety and well-being of someone else. And I think about that when I hear about reports on the news of people going and, engaging in heinous crimes. Now, we've just heard over the last couple of weeks of, 20 plus mass shootings that have taken place in various environments, schools, hospitals. Somebody was shooting at people driving down the road, not that long ago, right? A little, it was 4 years old or 8-year-old, was killed in the process, you think that a person who would be engaged in something like that to some degree has to be desensitized to the care and concern for human life, right? And it's not just human life, it's animal life too. People do very abusive things to animals as well, okay? In fact, many people who become serial killers and murderers and abusers of other people generally get started abusing animals because they feel that they can take a greater advantage over something that's, for the most part, is not going to fight back, and at least is not going to go and tell on them, right? Unless you're dealing with the dog whisperer or something. So it says, in other words, seeing people get hurt in the movies and video games lessen one's ability to care about people when they get hurt in real life, right? And I think that most of us, to some degree, I per say to a great degree, of those of us who are studying and practicing the peaceful solution and being aware of the negative influences and pushing those things away. When we see somebody get hurt, we're pretty sensitive to that. I've seen a person run into a pole before, and I'm like, ooh, yeah, or somebody get their toe, something heavy dropped on their toe. We know what those things feel like, right? Or somebody put their hand on a hot stove or something like that. It's like, ooh, ow, yeah, man, that's gotta hurt, But when you're desensitized, you're like, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, I guess. I mean, he broke his leg, he poked his eye out. What's the big deal? The guy got shot. It could have been worse, right? This is the mindset of a person who has no care and concern for another person, another life, okay? In fact, desensitization makes it more likely that people, now notice here, people will respond. And this is what we covered in the previous chapter on responding, right? The importance or how to respond. In fact, let's go back 107, 106, 107. Page 106 and 107 of this unit here, it talks about responding. If you just look real quick at that center paragraph, it says, when you are in a conflict where someone is on the brink of losing control, it is up to you. Now, it doesn't say it's up to that person or the person who's losing control, or it's up to you to point out to that person that they're losing control. Don't make a bad choice now. Don't make a bad, watch what you say to me. I practice self-control if I were you. No, it's up to us as individuals, right? As we teach our students, it's up to you as individuals, right? See that person pointing that finger right there? It's up to you to not to allow their behavior to influence the way you respond. You remember we talked about the triggers to anger, the triggers and the sequence of anger, all right, the stages and so forth. Now, a lot of these things can be triggers that can lead to a person, the individual, us, becoming angry. But anger is not the bad thing. It's how we choose to respond in that situation. And it could be even doubly hard when the person is one who always is giving you a hard time, right? Somebody who's outside of your friend group or your clique or whatever, right? This person, possibly, maybe they might seem like the arrogant, cocky guy in the office or the bully in the school or whatever the case might be. You still have to respond in a positive way. Remember, this is not always an easy road to travel, right? We covered that in the very first chapter again of the character unit. It's not the road that everybody's on either, because they want what makes them look cool. They want what makes them look popular. They want what's going to gain the most friends and quote unquote respect from their peers. Well, in today's society, they get that respect by disrespecting other people. Of course, that does not actually, it's not respect, and it doesn't bring respect. It says this can be very difficult to do. The likelihood is that some of your anger triggers, notice here, will be pushed. Now, if you're not on guard, you can lose your cool, blow your top, and respond with anger. This will only make the situation worse, and in situations where someone else is irritable, angry, and aggressive, you must still maintain your self-control. And so you see how this was already leading us up to the very next chapter of what we're in maintaining self-control. And it was covered in the previous class. President Lincoln, not previous, but previous, one of the previous classes, Lincoln said that it's bad enough when one fool loses his head. It's doubly bad when there are two, which puts two people in the position of a fool. So it says, violence then becomes an accepted way to deal with situations. So when a person responds with verbal and physical aggression when angered, right, when they do that over a period of time, every time you do something, whatever the case might be, practicing a positive character trait, practicing a negative character trait, performing a skill or a task, every time you do it, you're locking that pattern more and more in your mind. So it becomes more and more a part of you, okay? To the point where some people, when they do certain things, certain skills, they say that it's like mindless. Like, I don't even have to use my mind to do it. I can just automatically do this without even really thinking about it, right? It becomes an easy habit, okay? Well, you know, we don't ever want to become mindless in the peaceful solution. You know, we encourage you to always use your mind. Use your mind more instead of less, right? Society has made it to where people can use their minds less, and as a result, the mind is like a muscle. The less it's used, the weaker it gets, you know? And science is showing that the minds of a lot of people today are actually physically smaller than the minds of people, you know, 10, 20, 30 years ago, before everything else became so smart that the individual who's using that smart device can be pretty stupid, right? You know, it doesn't require much intellect to do much of anything nowadays. You know, me personally, I still like to, you know, it's little thing, but I still like to use to write down things, numbers on paper and add them up, right? I still like to add things up in my head. I like to keep that skill sharp because, oh, how easy it is to open up a calculator app and then, you know, punch in a big number. Now, I mean, some things you kind of have to if you're pressed for time. You know, I don't want to sit there and do long division while I'm trying to figure out square footage or something like that. But it keeps your mind sharp. You know, it's the same thing with maintaining our character traits, maintaining a positive character, maintaining the practicing of self-control, except every day, right? We have the opportunity to do this. There's no time throughout your week, throughout our week, throughout your day, where you can go, huh, man, come to think of it, I didn't even have to practice self-control today. You're never going to run into that, you know? I don't think I had to really exercise one positive character trait today. You're going to be doing it, or you're going to be doing the other. You're going to be doing the opposite, right? So we have to be aware of our thoughts. We have to be aware of our environment. We have to be aware of the influences that elicit a response from us. Violence then becomes an accepted way to deal with situations that are frustrating or upsetting. Instead of using self-control to consider appropriate ways to handle a disagreement, people who are accustomed, now notice you're accustomed, that's something that they're used to doing. It's something that's a part of their environment, it's a part of their experience, it's a part of the way that they handle things. It's the norm. People who are accustomed to watching violence on television are more likely to be physically and verbally aggressive. They develop the mentality that violence is a normal and acceptable part of life. And I've heard that statement come from people before. You know, when there's a situation where someone is being picked on and being bullied, possibly even being, you know, physically abused by the bully. And some adults will go, that's just a part of growing up. You know? And this is the worst one. Builds character. You know, let them get beat up for a time or two. It builds character. You know what it builds up in the mind of the person who's being abused, especially if they're crying out, as was mentioned in the previous classes. You know, they're crying out to an authority for help, and those calls are kind of falling on deaf ears, right? They figure that they try to find another way to deal with the problem, okay? And it's not always a positive way. Some people really do try to find a way because they're, you know, certain characteristics within them. They don't want to do harm to anybody, even if somebody's doing harm to them. You know, it's kind of a rare breed, but there are those out there. But in a lot of cases, they find a negative way to deal with the problem. Okay, like the man who went and shot up a hospital because he was suffering with a lot of pain after a back surgery, right? You know, he dealt with it. He dealt with the pain too, right? He doesn't have it anymore, but it was dealt with in a negative way. There were consequences. It was a ripple effect. The people who lost their lives and the people who were witness to those things or heard about those things or who were family members of the victims, those things rippled out and it negatively impacted them as well, right? Now, I always say, don't choose a temporary solution. Don't choose a permanent solution to a temporary problem. A permanent solution to a temporary problem. Someone used that in regards to suicide. When people, choose to take their own life because something's too difficult, or they're tired of being bullied, or things are really hard, or depression or whatever, they take their life. It's like, that's a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? These, things change, people change, environments change, circumstances change. With the right guidance and direction and counsel, the individual can change as well. That's why education is important. But in that person's mind, whether it's a student, a teacher, an adult, whoever it is, they've reached their limit. Not that there's nothing else, but they've reached their limit because that's all they know. All these influences that they've garnered all their life has not taught them to choose a positive direction in which to grow. So they've exhausted everything else that they've seen, right? Because for the most part, you can only make a choice to do what you've been taught, what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've experienced. But they haven't been shown the peaceful solution, right? There are other options, and this is why we need more teachers. This is why we're encouraging, get your friends, get your coworkers, your fellow teachers, your fellow students, your peers, and so forth, and come and watch these classes. The more people we can get involved with learning, practicing, and teaching the peaceful solution, the better and the faster. It's going to take time, but eventually we're going to turn this whole pendulum around, and we're going to start to see society change their minds and their hearts in a different direction. So they develop the mentality that violence is a normal and acceptable part of life, and they see nothing wrong with pushing, hitting, and yelling in order to get their way. Okay, pushing, hitting, and yelling in order to get their way. Well, what we're showing people in society right now is that there is a new normal, so to speak, and that, of course, is through character education. And we've got some great information here. Don't miss the next class. Please don't miss any classes if possible. But as we get into, we're going to look at next class, some of the statistics on television watching. And of course, when you look up some of these statistics today, a lot of them are still kind of older, outdated. They haven't really taken much research on these things. But we have to take into consideration, like the previous teachers brought out, not only television and movies, but video games as well, social media, phones, tablets, things of that nature, computer. These also affect the amount of influences that go into a person's mind by the time they're 18 or older. Then we're going to see some of this monkey see and monkey do, right? And how dangerous that is. And how even in the last couple years, many young people in following these influences have actually lost their lives. Their lives were cut short by following trends, the monkey see, monkey do, the things that they see, the influences that go into their mind. They see it, it looks fun, it looks kind of interesting, oh wow, man, they look like they're having so much fun. It turns out to be fatal for them. They only got one shot at following an influence that person might have come out of it okay, so to speak, but they didn't. So it's really important to be mindful, because as society continues down this path of immorality, the consequences are just going to hit home greater. They're going to be more drastic. And in many cases, they're not going to take years before a person sees them. Sometimes it's just minutes or hours. So thank you for attending. Next class will be Sunday, June 19th, 5:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Thank you for coming to class, and we look forward to seeing you at the next class. Have a wonderful evening.